across 4 years of playing football, one of the things I started to notice, two players might sustain a comparable injury. The rehab time for one is double of what it might be for the other. And, there's a lot of pain and anguish that may accompany one person's experience of that injury, but not the other. Everybody's experience of something like that is very personal. You can't really understand one person's pain by studying somebody else. It may very well not generalize, and more often than not, it's not going to generalize.
Substance use disorder touches all our lives, and often we feel hopeless or frustrated in our pursuit to understand how and why it happens.
Welcome to APC Recovery Cafe, where we discuss the topics and trends around substance use, provide education and resources, offer recovery support, and also discuss prevention tactics, all through the stories of the people who have been there.
We invite you to grab your favorite coffee or tea and join us for a variety of guests that will bring understanding, information, connection, and hope.
Together, we can break the stigma and pave a brighter future for each other.
Hey folks, welcome into this episode of APC Recovery Cafe. I'm Art Wimberly. I'm a person grateful to be in long-term recovery, and I'm your moderator for today. Also today in studio, we've got Edward Taylor with APC. Hey Edward, how are you?
Morning, sir.
Yeah.
How are you?
Would you introduce our special guest today?
Sure. Our guest today is Dr. Burel Goodin, professor of psychology at UAB. And he also works for CAPI at UAB, which is I'm going to nail it first try.
Get it.
Center for Addiction and Pain Prevention and Intervention.
Nailed it.
Wow. One of the
Nice
most
word.
difficult acronyms or acrostics I've ever heard.
Yeah, there's a whole story behind that we won't necessarily get into, but yeah, Cappy.
Yeah. So Recovery Cafe, we always discuss the beverages of choice. Both of these drinks are from Seeds. That's usually where we get them from. So I always get their Iron Fist brew, and then I get a shot of espresso in it. And then Dr. Gooden has
hot chocolate. Because I don't drink coffee.
You don't like coffee?
And no, most things, like when you smell them, that's kind of how they taste.
Yeah. And
But coffee's the one thing
doesn't.
that ain't.
Doesn't
So
do it
like,
for
it
You have to
smells
doctor it up
amazing.
so much, you might as well drink something else.
Yeah,
huh?
I might as well just drink a cup of sugar.
But was it good though?
The hot chocolate?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about your research, and then also maybe go into kind of what got you started on that path. Like what's the passion behind it? What was there an event that happened that led you to want to take that route or anything like that?
Yeah. So thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful to be here. Appreciate that. Bit of a circuitous journey for me to get to where I am now. First person in my family to go to college, so first generation college attendee, and at the time sort of picked college based upon where I could get playing time for football, right?
Nice.
Because when I was 18, that's what it was about. Excuse me. So across 4 years of playing football, one of the things I started to notice was, two players might sustain a comparable injury. The rehab time for one is double of what it might be for the other. And, there's a lot of pain and anguish that may accompany one person's experience of that injury, but not the other. So I was like, that's pretty neat. I wonder what that's about. And I was a biology major at the time. So started to get into that. Excuse me. But then also started to recognize that everybody's experience of something like that, like an injury and pain that goes along with it, is very personal, right? You can't really understand one person's pain by studying somebody else, right? Because it may very well not generalize, and more often than not, it's not going to generalize.
Yeah.
Right?
Would you say part of that is in terms of pain tolerance? But that's not the only thing you're talking about.
No, so some of it may manifest as pain tolerance, but really it's in making meaning of the pain.
Oh,
Right? What does the
okay.
pain mean for
Wow.
that particular individual? And sometimes, a person, as a function of their learned environment and history, may see pain as just a threat to be avoided at all cost. So when they're confronted with it, it's very anxiety provoking, and they want to be done with it as quickly as possible. Correspondingly, somebody may see it as a challenge to be overcome, right? So the coping mechanisms and the mindset that may be sort of engaged when it's seen as a threat versus a challenge, can be
Yeah.
quite different.
Wow.
So in my mind, this idea of pain, which is what I really started to get into as I pursued more schooling, is this really neat coming together of pain, biology and psychology. And that's really what always kind of captivated me scientifically and intellectually.
Yeah. That is fascinating. So would you say too, in this idea, I know one of the theories of the more what we would call the current chaos we're in terms of the opioid epidemic, the opiate epidemic, kind of this second or third wave in this country in the last 120 years. One of the theories is this perfect storm of confluence of things that happened back in the 90s. Let's say one was the idea of reimbursement medically for the way pain was managed. So the better rating you got, the more money you got. Mm-hmm. But then there was another piece of that that's theorized in the culture in general, that we have begun to conflate discomfort and pain. Does that make any sense? The idea that, well, sometimes discomfort is just normal and you need to deal with it. Yeah. But we began to subtly, in a nuanced way, make discomfort be more pain, and it had to be dealt with at a more a deeper level.
Yeah. So my take on that, comparable to what you're suggesting, is this idea of pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Right? Because pain is actually a very useful thing, right? At least in its kind of short-term acute form, right? Yeah. It's very adaptive. Right?
It awakens us to something.
Something's wrong here.
Yeah.
We need to pay attention to it and
yeah.
take our hand off the stove, right? Or not, stick our finger in that electric outlet again, right? So that idea of wanting to do away with pain is kind of a precarious one because, it serves a purpose. Right? There are people who are actually born genetically without the ability to detect pain. And they actually don't live that long. Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Because the pain is meant to keep you safe.
Yeah, I remember Dr. Paul Brand, who's deceased now, but his specialty was in leprosy. Mm-hmm. And that begins to be one of the problems with folks that have to suffer with that is the nerve systems are destroyed. Mm-hmm. And they can't feel pain, and so they'll injure themselves.
Right. Yeah. So that's in the acute sense, right? But once that pain becomes chronic, then it certainly isn't a useful process anymore, right?
Yeah.
And then that's where people have to start trying to make sense of their life with chronic pain because nobody asked for it, right? And it can be a little bit of an existential issue, right? Like, I was supposed to be this top-notch accountant, go, and now, I'm not even working. I'm filing for Social Security disability because I can't go to work, what have you. It's that idea of suffering, right? So I'm suffering.
What's
here.
the reason for this?
Yeah. And there can be a lot of grief. People may very well mourn the them that they were, and who they expected to be before, some of that stuff got derailed by pain. And in those instances, that grief, that sort of existential crisis isn't going to do your pain any favors. Because something that I also started to get very, very interested in is sort of that overlap between pain and emotions. And the fact is that they're so intertwined that it's in my opinion, it's very erroneous to think that you can separate them. What ends up happening is that but that person's depressed. So their pain is just because they're sad. Not necessarily, right? The fact is they may be having a pain. It's exacerbated because of the depression. Right. The two things feed off each other to really create this problem.
Get into a vicious cycle.
Right? Yeah. Because the thing is with pain, it's a very physical and emotional experience, right? So that's important to keep in mind because there can be this sort of distinction. Well, that's physical pain. I saw you hurt your back. I saw the image of your back and there's a big old disc that's out of place. That's real, right? But your pain is this emotional thing. You should be able to control that a little bit better if you just had a little bit more mental fortitude, right? That's not real pain. Right? And that idea of real pain or not real pain stigmatized.
Or even in place of mental fortitude, if you just had more faith.
You
More
name
of
it.
a
Whether
man, more
whether that
faith,
fortitude
more-
is whether that fortitude is coming internally, which
Yeah.
is you, right? You need to be more resilient,
Yeah.
or externally, right?
Yeah.
Like if you had a better relationship with God,
Yeah.
then you'd be better taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my belief is neither one of those are accurate.
Okay. Good.
Right?
Yeah.
Neither one of those are. They can both be important. Don't get me
Yes.
wrong. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. But neither one of those are entirely accurate. For
It's not
what-
telling the whole story.
It's not.
When there's a sharp, strong emotional pain, there can be some physical
Yes.
components to
Yeah.
that. I mean,
Yes.
maybe it's interpreted in the brain the same way as if you smash my hand with a hammer or
Yeah.
something like.
Yeah. The brain and many aspects of the brain process a feeling or an emotion in the exact same way that it would, say, a physical stimulus that causes pain, right?
Is this Bessel van der Kolk and The Body Keeps a Score, that type of his research? Is that similar to what we're talking about?
So there's it's grounded in some of that,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
But there's a lot of neuroscience here, right? In thinking that psychology or how we sort of interact with our world, right? What people might describe as our personality, what have you, is a manifestation of our brain, right? Our neuroscience and our learned experiences and how we grew up, right? So with that, the thing is that, you may have a back injury or knee osteoarthritis as a function of just getting old or what have you. Right?
Hey, watch it.
Hey, listen, my left knee is starting to give me some issues myself, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to. be
Why did you look
accusatory
over
there.
here
I
when you
know,
said,
I know,
okay.
I know.
Art's like,
Bias.
good.
Yeah, I don't have my leg up here because it's hurting.
Yeah.
Okay?
Hey, you're out there playing pickleball, man. You got it. So the point being is that, there are cells and receptors in our body that can detect, hey, there's a tissue injury there or something like that. And it goes to our brain, and there's a little place in the middle of the brain called the thalamus, and that sort of acts as the filter. From there, all those signals go to the rest of our brain. But every single place that a pain signal might go to in our brain is also a place that processes emotion. The thalamus is actually the only part in our brain that's purely kind of related to pain signals.
Okay.
Right? But that's not the end journey. It has to then go to the various parts of our brain for meaning to be made of it. Right?
Wow.
Yeah,
And that can be very emotionally laden as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about maybe the evolutionary purpose of that. And you think about, let's say any example, strong emotion of sadness or grief or anger.
Yeah.
And you think about the purposes of that, just like there's a purpose for, I've never touched the stove before. I had no idea. I touched it. It scalded my hand. Now I remember to not touch that because of the pain. It's like, well, there's that time I got into that big argument with some stranger about something stupid and it really pissed me off. And now I know hey, next time just chill out and don't do that, because you might get, maybe you say that to somebody who actually has a gun or a knife and you weren't prepared for that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there?
Well, let me tell you even a little bit more about that. So way back to, let's say, prehistoric man, woman, and it may not actually have been prehistoric times, but way back
Neanderthal
when.
man.
Yeah,
right?
the primal.
Right. We as people or aspiring people, depending upon how far back you go, we're very much more nomadic, kind of taking care of our own stuff and just existing, right? Well, we already had a pain system that had evolved in our brain, right? But then as we continue to, move forward and progress throughout time, it became apparent to us as human beings that we could be way more prosperous if we stuck together.
Yeah, socializing.
Right? If
yeah.
we started to socialize, right? So we, started to have to cooperate for farming and community, what have you.
Yeah.
And we needed to develop the neuroscience to make us more adept at being social.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that neuroscience just overlaid on top of structures and systems that were already there, right?
The self-preservation instinct that
Yes,
started.
and part of that was pain. So the thing is if, let's say, you experienced a rejection, right? So, for example, your significant other just said, I'm done. I'm leaving you. You might describe that as a broken heart, something that's painful, right? And just generally our goal is to avoid pain, right? From, say, smashing into a wall or something, right? Our goal is also to avoid those really sort of problematic social rejections, right?
Which causes emotional pain.
Yeah, and again, it causes an emotional response that can be painful.
In the body.
Right.
Yeah.
That's my point. But it's not necessarily emotional pain, because saying emotional pain kind of indicates that there's a distinction between emotional and physical pain.
Okay.
It's pain. The
Gotcha.
brain only knows it as pain.
Yeah.
There you
See
go
what
with
I'm
that
saying? I
do.
stigma again. over there.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
But also, so let me take it one step further. Right?
Yeah.
And this is also an important aspect of like the research that I do. So if social connections or lack thereof can have important pain implications, right? What about individuals that might experience things like discrimination, right? Whether that's a racism or a sexism or any of those types of isms where, you know, one group of individuals sort of makes this other individual feel as if they're less because of some type of identity, right? So to the extent that they experience that as a rejection or an ostracism, right? That idea of a social abandonment,
They're the other.
it hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of where a lot of my my research lies.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
And where things like stigma, right? For some, and also too, something in pain. It's like, well, why is pain stigmatizing? Right. A lot of chronic pain is what we might kind of refer to as kind of medically unexplained, or with a lot of diagnostic uncertainty.
Yeah.
That idea of like low back pain being directly related to, say, a bulging disc is actually a minority of cases.
Okay.
More often than not, that low back pain isn't really identified as like, that's it, right? So there's actually research that's been done to show that people like your healthcare providers, right, your friends and your family are actually less likely to take your pain seriously when they can't see any quote unquote good reason for it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stigma that can perpetrate because of that chronic pain.
Because of the vague diagnosis.
Exactly. And then let's say these are individuals maybe who have a pain with a vague diagnosis, right? And maybe their friends and family are like, you're just trying to get out of these chores, right?
Yeah.
And the employer's like, you're just trying to be on light duty so you don't actually have to work that hard and get a paycheck, right? And the doctor's like, are you just trying to really get some medicines that you otherwise wouldn't have access to? And then maybe on top of that, let's just really take it there. Let's say that individual also happens to be black and gay. Now, not even related to their pain, but they may be out in the community getting heat for these identities, and it's a compounding thing.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, that's something that no matter, in my mind, no matter what sort of new provider they get, who may come up with a really, really nice treatment plan, if there's still all that collateral hurt,
Yeah.
you know, and stuff that can be going on,
Makes their job a lot more difficult.
it's going to be hard to
Or
get relief.
impossible,
Yeah,
almost.
because it's one step forward, two steps
Yeah.
back, right? So that's a lot of what my research has been looking at and trying to understand why that is and how that manifests, ultimately what we can do about it. But then a lot of my other efforts as it relates to CAPI, right? And just, you know, being a little bit more on the scene at UAB and meeting with thought leaders or whatever is, what do we do? How do we take care of the patients that come to UAB? What do we do to try to improve the community and make it more harmonious throughout Birmingham and you know, the surrounding communities? I mean, at the end of the day, you know, we may not all look alike, right? We may not all sort of want and desire the same things. That's fine, but we're all people, right? We need to take care of each other, right? Because that's how we've evolved, right? To be social,
Right.
to take care of each other. It's fine if we don't all agree
Yeah.
how to best do that, right? I mean, that's what makes it interesting, because you have this thought and I have this thought and we talk about it. We may not even ultimately agree at the end of some sort of debate or whatever, but at the end of the day, man, I don't want to see you like put out for it,
Yeah.
right? Like you still need to be taken care of, right? You're still my brother, right? So we need to take care of each other.
Was there something about your life that you think steered you? Because this is not only is it a fascinating, nuanced field you're in, but I think it's right at this stage of history, it's most needed.
Yeah.
But is there something about your life personally, do you think, that led you to this? Anything that impacted you? Or?
Yeah. So great question, right? I think that's always nice, you know, add a little context to it. So, you know, I guess it was maybe about 3 years after I was born, my mom was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, right? And it was the primary progressive type. So ultimately, it was just a slow,
Not the
steady
relapsing, not the
decline.
relapsing remitting.
Right. Just
Wow.
primary progressive. So it was just a slow, steady decline. And at a young age, I had to do a lot of caretaker type things to help her out, but also stuff that she might otherwise do. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I had to learn to make a dinner and do my own laundry pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
And take care of my sister and, do a lot of stuff that was meant to be helpful to the household, what have you. My parents never went to college. So, my dad raised us family of four, on a pretty menial salary. There was a lot of times where we didn't necessarily have what we needed, but we made do. So I guess the thing is that at an early age, it was like, I'm helping folks. I'm learning how to help. I want to be helpful, right? Taking care of each other, right? On the other hand, growing up as sort of the poor kid in the trailer, right, who lived on the south side of the railroad tracks, right? Like, I knew there was a certain sort of way that people might look at me,
Stigma.
and I experienced
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to equate that to perhaps some of the reasons that other people are stigmatized in this day and age. But, when I was in high school, it was a bit embarrassing to, have a prospective girlfriend come over to the trailer, right? And see the fact that I didn't actually have my own room and things were set up to like help take care of my mom, who at that point wasn't ambulatory. So that colored a lot of it, right? Also, too, I was never meant to go to college, right? There was never that expectation. So when it became apparent that I could, that was pretty cool. I took it seriously, not too seriously. I don't really take too much of anything too seriously, right? But then as I started to kind of get invested, I was like, I'm kind of good at learning and knowing stuff, and then wanted to kind of go further. And I also just wanted to explore what was out there. At this point, I was in like the cornfields of central Illinois. I knew I wanted to do a little something different, so I moved to Boston and kind of got a taste of what the East Coast life was like.
Is that where you
up
went
there.
to school?
I did my first master's degree up there.
First master's degree.
Yeah. Well, so at the time, it was just going to be that master's degree. It was a mental health master's, which made me license eligible after I got done with it, but wanted to do some more research and just take it deeper. So ended up looking into clinical psychology PhD programs and got accepted to a program at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. So I moved to Baltimore and spent 5 years there. Another quick pit stop up to Connecticut for 1 year to round out that internship, and then the training was done. So I was like, all right, now I'm ready to do some things, and needed just a little bit more sort of guidance and experience in how to do research, which is fairly convoluted if you didn't know. But went down to Florida for that and spent 2 years at the University of Florida doing a pain research type of fellowship, and then got hired here at UAB. And that was 10 years ago.
Wow.
10 years ago, yeah. I mean, just last month, 10 years, UAB, kind of rose through the academic ranks to full professor now.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Did you always know when you were training that you wanted to do research primarily, or did that develop later?
No. So, I mean, I like to say that this was all by design. But
just wasn't yours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was not following any sort of blueprint. Most of the stuff was sort of backed into it and was like, oh, okay, this is going to work. No, so I didn't really know that I wanted to do research, frankly, because like I didn't understand it. Like when I was growing up, nobody I knew had a career that involved research or academia or anything like that.
Had to be way more practical.
Yeah, so I had no idea what that was even about. And then when the time came to like maybe talk to some trusted individuals, and like nobody in my family ever went to college, so they didn't know. It was like, hey, if you want to go like lay sheetrock, we can tell you how to make this work. Right?
We're your guy. Yeah.
But yeah, this whole like research thing. So I didn't really understand it. So it wasn't until I got to Boston and kind of got exposed to it a little bit. And then people were like, well, this is why we're doing this. This is why we're doing that. Trying to answer this question with this information. We can address this other question, or we can kind of implement it into an intervention to help people with whatever. And that's where I was like, that's cool.
So I was curious, Edward, from your standpoint as a recovering person and as one who now works as a helper, what are some of the ideas or things that come to mind for you from addiction world?
I remember when I first started having issues with my addiction and I went to treatment for the first time. I just had this, I mean, first of all, I was terrified. So I wasn't really thinking properly. I'd done so much damage to my brain, but also I just assumed it's either the 12 steps or you're screwed. Like this has to work. And it through over time. Well, actually, to be honest, I still took that approach. The last time I went to treatment and 5 years ago or whatever. But thankfully it does work for me, and it's a perfect fit for me and a lot of the beliefs that I have, the 12 steps are. But through time, I've become more open, and certainly at this point, I want whatever works for somebody subjectively, if it's, I mean, there's one person in particular I think of, when I heard his story, I'm sitting there and I'm asking, and this person struggled with addiction, and they're telling me how they got into recovery. And they said their primary means of recovery at the beginning and throughout the whole process is CBT. Mm. And I'm sitting there listening to it. I'm like, okay, when's he going to mention the 12 steps? When's that coming to play? And he never did. And I was like, damn, nice, and so I've had plenty of those experiences, and I've seen people too, where they tried the 12 steps and just for whatever reason, it didn't speak to them. Yeah. And of course, all I want that person to experience is freedom from their addiction.
To be clear to everybody out there, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, not CBD oil.
Correct.
Right? Okay. All right. CBT, although that could come into play.
Cognitive behavioral cannabis. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, there's some of that too. I have my objective truth with my recovery, which is sure other kind of auxiliary things complement the 12 steps for me: therapy, CBT, exercise, hobbies, and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But my experience has shown that my foundation has to be the 12 steps.
From there, I was want to go back to you, Dr. Goodin, the idea of we started with in terms of everybody's perception of pain and filters and so forth and so on. Have you seen, or are you seeing in what you do in your research, where do you see it connect in the field of prevention and recovery and substance use disorder? Are there some things now that you would say, we really need, in our end of what we do out there, what do we need to know now maybe that we didn't know before that would help people recover?
My perspective with a lot of things as it relates to, say, addiction, pain, is that nobody asked for it, right? When things start to come about, people think, I need to find a way to deal with this, which is a way to cope, right? Mm-hmm. So I need to cope. What are my resources to do so, right? And the fact is that some individuals may have limited resources, or they just, based upon their awareness of what's out there, have various barriers and limitations to resources. I think of chronic pain. I think of, issues around addiction related to, from a neuroscience perspective, as diseases of the brain, right? And that's not to say that, you have this disease, now it's insurmountable, right? It can be treated. Things can be managed, right? Importantly, I see it as a brain disease as opposed to a moral failure. Let's say around addiction and pain, sometimes just to sort of get over, you inherently have to sort of really be sort of selfish, right? No, I know you wanted me to come to this thing today, but I don't feel good. I need to stay on the couch. So that person's disappointed now or something, right? Or, the nature of addiction, what have you, there may be some manipulations there, something that may undermine trust from people. Right? And now all of a sudden they're like, well, I can't take your word for it anymore.
Yeah. Oh, I've been there.
Right? I'd rather just be able to have somebody else's perspective about you that I trust more, or something I could just draw your blood, look at it and be like, that's the amount of pain. That's the amount of addiction. Something there where I don't really have to take your word for it anymore. That's a problem, right? Because pain, addiction are such personal disease processes, because the treatments, precision, right? To be precise, it needs to be personal.
Yeah.
We have to appreciate these people's stories and understand where they're coming from and what they're asking for and what they believe would be most helpful to them, right?
Yeah.
You know, I may market myself as a pain expert, you know, and it's reasonable to think that's why I'm doing this podcast with y'all today, because I'm a pain expert. But I'm not an expert in somebody's lived experience, right? The only way I can really become to appreciate that is I got to ask a person, right? And I got to try to understand.
What opportunities do you guys need that maybe somebody listening can connect and help with? Anything you can think of?
Yeah, absolutely, right? So my thought there is in terms of how to connect is to please connect, to reach out, right?
Okay.
So what I mean by that is you know, I'll name drop Cappy again, right? We're out there, we're trying to do more for the community. The issue is, and at least from my perspective, but I'll go out on a limb and probably say a good number of my colleagues, is that we just get wrapped up in our office, in our little lab or our clinic in UAB, and even though we're about that community, we're not necessarily in the community,
Right.
right? As much as we'd like to be, which means we don't necessarily know like who's grassroots, who the players are, who's doing the work, right? So making connections, you know, because there may be various things where we don't have the trust and the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like the goodwill with the community, right? As say like, you know, Edward and APC might, but we do have a little bit of cash, right? So Edward's like, you know, hey, do you mind like teaming with us to kind of bankroll some of this? And absolutely. And, you know, we've done that before, whether it's the End Addiction Walk or some other stuff. Those are the types of things that I think that we want to just be aware of, because, you know, not everything would require us to sort of bankroll, so to speak. Some of it's just in kind, show up, come on out, right?
Yeah.
And I definitely want to do more of that. That's something for me that's very important, because I do kind of just get caught up in my day-to-day of like, I go to my office and I make sure my team is taking care of everything, but to what end, right?
Right.
For the community, for the people. Well, who are those people? I don't know. I haven't seen them in a while, right? I'd like to get back out there and talk with them and see what's up. So reach out, connect with us.
So, folks, thank you for joining us for this episode of the APC Recovery Cafe.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. We'll be back with you soon. Thanks.
One of the things that APC is known for is being a connector, because we're stronger together.
Not only are we there for those who are suffering through substance use disorder, but we're there for family members, and we really take our job seriously.
We all have personal reason why we're in this field. We're changing people's lives one community at a time.